Hello and welcome everyone to the Abyssal Fracture Extreme Guide, the final extreme in Endwalker. Before we begin, we have two things to do. We will need light parties, and within those light parties, we'll need to make sure that the melees and tanks are biased in the northern corners, and the healers and range are biased in the southern corners for their spots. Next, we'll need to set up 4 enumeration pair towers for a mechanic at the end of the fight. When the encounter begins, Zeromus will lead with casting Abyssal Nox. Abyssal Nox will reduce your entire party's health down to 1. You have 10 seconds to fully heal everyone in the party. It is worth noting that tanks in particular are hardest to top due to their massive health pool. All tanks other than Dark Knight have plenty of access to heal themselves, so if you're playing with a Dark Knight, make sure that they're top. As everyone's being healed to full, there will be some lines on the floor, drawing out to various parts of the map. Once they reach their destination, they will begin to glow and do massive circular AoEs at their destination. There will be a few safe spots visible, but it's important to note that after the first round detonates, a second round of lines will also be following in pursuit, and you'll need to quickly adjust to where the first ones detonated. After the 2 sets of dodges, Zeromus will then cast Sable Thread, which is classified as a wild charge. That means it's an 8-man line AoE stack, where the front 2 players must be tanks and using heavy mitigation. He will blast the party a total of 6 times, tanks taking the brunt of the damage. Once Sable Thread is done, he will then target both tanks for a buster called Dark Matter. It's important that you don't use all your mitigations on Sable Thread, so that way you have something for Dark Matter. It will hit both tanks 3 times. They're also massive AoEs, so make sure you don't clip anybody with them. Once the buster is resolved, he will then begin casting Visceral Whirl. Line AoEs will spawn all over the arena, leaving 2 safe spots. One will always be in melee range, and one will be in the back of the arena at a range. For this first round of the mechanic, we can always just go into melee range. Once the AoEs go off, a bunch of X's will then spawn around the arena. They will detonate in an X shape, and there will be a total of 4 patterns to choose from. I'll provide some diagrams on how to solve each one, and you'll quickly locate the patterns as you practice. After everyone is hidden from the X-shaped AoEs, Zeromus will then use Flare, which will spawn 2 towers on the northwestern and southeastern portions of the arena. In these 2 towers, 4 players will want to stack in them, but it's important to note that we want both of our melee DPS and our tanks in the northern tower, and our 2 healers and ranged DPS in the southern tower. As soon as this snapshots, you'll want to make sure you move out of the tower, as if you stay within it, you'll take damage and accrue vulnerability stacks. Once the tower is resolved, there will be red lines visible from the towers, indicating the lanes that are going to be hit by a fire AoE. Like the previous mechanic, there are a total of 4 patterns, with different safe spots for each. I'll make sure to include some diagrams on what these 4 safe spots look for. 3 of the safe spots are around the middle of the arena, which helps you locate them quicker. After your party has successfully avoided the fire AoEs, Zeromus will follow up with an attack called Void Bio. Void Bio is slightly misleading, as he will spawn a series of orbs on the northern side of the arena, but the order they spawn in does not actually matter in the slightest. Once the orbs have spawned, in a random order, they will begin floating south towards you. And at the same time, he will cast another Visceral Whirl. Our objective is to enter the safe spot without colliding with one of these orbs. Make sure that you're not rushing to get into the safe spot, as there's actually quite a lot of time here, and touching an orb is almost certain death unless your healer plans on expending numerous resources to keep you alive. Once in the safe spot, like the previous Visceral Whirl, more X's will spawn around the arena using the same 4 patterns that we've already been practicing earlier. Move to the safe spot once again, and dodge the AoEs. Once that's all resolved, Zeromus will then begin casting Big Bang. This is where our quadrants are going to come into play. Spread markers are going to appear on every player, as well as AoEs all over the arena, making spreading quite cumbersome. Have 2 players go to each quadrant of the arena, with the melees and tanks each taking a northern quadrant, and healers and range DPS taking a southern quadrant. Once you only have 2 people in each quadrant, spreading should be a lot more manageable. And at the same time of the attack hitting you, you will then be applied with numerous debuffs that we can actually ignore for now. The only debuff that we're going to worry about for now is a 12-second damage over time that healers will just have to make sure everyone's topped for. Void Meteor will then be cast, and everyone will see proximity markers spawn all over the arena. You can stack directly in front of Zeromus for this and have no trouble at all. Just make sure to mitigate. Next, we will have roll-baited meteors. You will either have all 4 DPS with a tether first, or all 4 supports tethered first. The objective is to spread all 4 tethers into the meteors in front of you. We want to try and fill the gaps with these meteor baits, but if we don't go far enough, we don't leave enough room for the next 4 people to do their baits. There should always be 2 lines on the west side of the arena, and 2 lines on the east side of the arena. It's also worth mentioning that if somebody is dead during this mechanic, when they get raised, they will not get a reassign, and this will not cause a wipe. I am not advocating for sack strats, but it is on the table if people choose to. But I would never recommend it or do it in Party Finder. A couple things to note during the Meteor Impact mechanic is that if any player waiting for their turn is standing in one of the lines, it will automatically fail the mechanic. So make sure not to stand in anyone else's lane while waiting. Number 2, you cannot stand close to other pre-existing meteors when doing your baits. Number 3, you have to make sure that your tether turns from a purple to a gold, or you will die. It is worth mentioning that if you fail the proximity bait, only you will die and you will not cause a raid wipe. But if you accidentally blow up a meteor, that will cause a raid wipe. Assuming all of the meteors were baited correctly, you will then see numerous orange AoEs appear under each meteor. To resolve this, we'll just need to back off and go back in front of Zeromus' hitbox. We should be safe from all of the meteors. Once the meteors have resolved, the party will want to stack once more in front of Zeromus' hitbox, or directly on top of it. The time has come to now talk about those debuffs that we have. So let's go ahead and quickly define all of them. Everyone will have an acceleration debuff, which means when the timer elapses, we will need to make sure that we are not attacking or moving. Another debuff that every player will have is a spread marker. A healer will be marked with a stack marker, which will be soaked by 4 players a little bit later on. And finally, 2 DPS players will have a lightning debuff. The lightning debuff means that when the timer goes off, they can't be standing next to anyone else. So, once everyone is stacked in front of Zeromus, you will see purple chain links tether the supports to the DPS. Once the purple is visible, you'll want to wait a moment and not run right away. Visceral Whirl is going to cast again, and this time we're going to have our 4 DPS players run to the northern safe spot, while the supports are going to run to the southern safe spot. This will resolve the purple chain links. Once you've reached the safe spot, it's time for everyone to resolve their acceleration debuff. And to do so, you can press the escape key to make sure you're not auto-attacking, not attacking the boss, and not moving. The acceleration will resolve, and it's time to dodge the X AoEs that always follow up after Visceral. These will use the same 4 patterns that we've already done, except this time, after it snapshots, we will all have spread markers to take care of and move away from each other. The final mechanic is to deal with the healer stack, which should go right in front of the boss, and soaked by the 3 players that do not have the lightning debuff, and none of the tanks, as the tanks will also have another dark matter tank buster here. The final result will be the 2 tanks spread out taking their buster. The 2 lightning AoE DPS players are also spread, and the 4 remaining players are helping the healer survive a stack. After that mechanic resolves, everyone should go back to standing in front of Zeromus, and he'll begin casting Black Hole. Black Hole is going to pick one player with a blue beacon AoE marker. At the same time, he will cast Fractured Eventide, which will cleave one portion of the arena with a line AoE. It's imperative that all 7 players who do not have the beacon go to the same side that he's cleaving, except hiding behind him. The one player with the beacon can go either true west or true east, depending on which side he starts on. If the boss is cleaving west, then your beacon will go to true west. If the boss is cleaving east, then the beacon will go to true east. As soon as the beacon snapshots, it will leave a black hole on the ground that will slowly expand and pull anyone in to instantly one-shot them. But because our person is so close, they can quickly follow the rest of the party as they chase the beam to safety, running away from the black hole, but also making sure to not get hit by the giant beam. After that resolves, Big Crunch will then be casted, which is a similar mechanic to Big Bang, where we'll want to return to our quadrants with our spread markers, except this time, it will not give us a plethora of debuffs, only one, which is a damage over time. You want to make sure you use some heavy mitigations on this, as it does quite a bit of damage. At this stage of the fight, Zeromus will then begin repeating some mechanics, as Abyssal Nox is coming up next, which is our heal doom check from the very beginning of the fight. You'll want to resolve this the same way you did the first time. The lines will once again appear on the floor, and you will dodge the circular AoEs and move into the first pair that exploded, just like the beginning of the fight. After that, another Sable Thread will quickly be targeted on a healer, which is another wild charge, so your tanks are going to make sure they're in front, as well as everyone using heavy mitigation. It's also worth mentioning that an additional blast will hit the party, meaning that you will take a total of 7 hits here. You'll want to use a ton of mitigation and healing resources here. The next mechanic will spawn 2 towers on the east and west side of the arena that will soak with standard light parties. The cast bar will indicate 2 potential mechanics, either Sparking Flare or Branding Flare. In the event it is Sparking Flare, we will return to our quadrants with our buddy and spread. If it is Branding Flare, we will return to our quadrants and stack in pair stacks. A very important note is the 2 furthest players from Zeromus will get a following marble AoE that will chase you around for a total of 5 blasts. To resolve this, whether or not it is spread or buddy stacks, we have our ranged players begin in the back corners and collapse towards north, so that way by the time the marbles reach north, they're already despawned and they can't make it to the party. Once the party has successfully navigated away from the chasing marble AoEs, another bio will be cast and green orbs will spawn on the north side of the arena. He'll follow up with another Visceral Whirl, just like before, So we want to make sure we avoid these green orbs at all costs, and do the follow-up X AoE dodge, just like before. When Zeromus begins casting Rend the Rift, this is when he begins to phase. Rend the Rift will deal modest damage, you don't need to use too many mitts on it, and the arena and environment will completely change, as all of his attack patterns are now different. AoEs will now begin spawning all over the map under players, and he will begin using Nostalgia. Nostalgia is a massive hitting raid-wide that begins as physical damage and switches to magic damage halfway through. So melee DPS should pop Feint right away, and any players with Addle should wait a GCD or two before attacking it on. This does a pretty good amount of damage, so make sure you use some heal resources here as well. Once the raid damage is done, Zeromus will then cast Flow of the Abyss, which will make a portal on the side of the arena. The portal will soon cleave whichever row it is stationed on. If it's in the middle, you'll want to make sure that all 8 raid players are on the northern row. If it's cleaving the northern row, you'll want to make sure that everybody is in the middle row. At the same time, there will be periodic AoEs all over the floor that you'll need to watch for, as well as an RNG mechanic. You will either get 8 spreads, a stack marker, or 4 enumeration towers that need to be soaked in pairs. That's the reason we made our enumeration partners at the start of the fight, just in case we get this iteration of the mechanic. It's worth mentioning that the spread AoEs can be soft failed. They don't do a crazy amount of damage, but they will stay on the floor after you've spread, so you'll want to make sure you quickly move out of them. I can't stress enough how important it is that if the middle row is being cleaved, that all 8 players should go to north by default, just in case you get enumeration towers or stacks. You'll want to make sure everyone's together, so that way the mechanic does not auto-fail. Once the RNG mechanic has been resolved, Zeromus will cast Chasmic Nails. At the same time, another rift will open on the side of the arena, so you'll need to double check which row is unsafe. And various cone AoEs will then spawn from Zeromus. They will first spawn in the order that they will detonate. And once a cone has detonated, you can freely move into that cone as it will never detonate again. The objective here is to avoid all of the small circular AoEs on the floor, and also try to keep track which cones are spawning first, so that way you know which one to scooch into. In the event that someone does get tagged by an AoE, there is a dot that will be applied to them that can be Asuna'd by your healers. At this point, Zeromus will then continue to cycle through the various Flow of the Abyss patterns, giving you a stack, enumeration, spreads, as well as a final Nostalgia cast doing massive raid damage. Assuming the boss has not been defeated at this point, he will then begin casting his Hard Enrage, which is called Big Bang. I hope this guide was useful for everyone, and I genuinely appreciate you all tuning in and checking it out. I do stream on Twitch full-time at twitch.tv/Ahricoffer, and I really look forward to making more guides for you all, as well as class guides for helping new players get into the game and pick which jobs they'd like to play. If you've had any questions or comments, feel free to let me know, as I will eagerly respond to all of them, and I look forward to you guys getting your clears. See ya.